Welcome to the Game of Thrones podcast, the officially unofficial podcast for Game of Thrones on HBO. I'm Jim.
I'm Aaron.
And we're here today to talk about Season 8, Episode 6, do our SpoiLore version of the podcast. In regard to the series finale, I don't know what that looks like, but I hear, Aaron, you've got a special segment planned.
Yeah.
And an upfront piece of feedback that you'd like to get to.
Yeah, there's something interesting because George has come out and made a lot of statements this week regarding... He said, people are asking him what he think. Is the books going to be different than the series? Is the series going to be the same as the books? And his answer was, well, yes and no, and yes and no, and yes and no. Like, he literally did that 8 times.
Yeah.
And he recommitted to having Winds done and then Dream. And then he said, yeah. But then he said today, or well, no, it was yesterday on his Nada blog, and this was sent in by Josh F. He sent in, he posted something yesterday to his Not a Blog entry, and this was sent to us by Josh F., who says, Gurm has cornered himself by saying he will be done by a specific date. He says that he is visiting New Zealand in the summer of 2020 for Worldcon and the Hugon Awards a year from now. A direct quote from his blog, as for finishing my book, I fear that New Zealand would distract me entirely too much. Best leave me here in Westeros for the nonce. But I tell you this.
In a way that, several television shows, both of his own properties and other people's, several other books would not.
Yeah. But I tell you this, if I don't have the Winds of Winter in hand when I arrive at New Zealand for Worldcon, you have my formal written permission to imprison me in a small cabin on White Island overlooking the lake of sulfuric acid until I'm done. Just so long as the acrid fumes do not screw up my old DOS word processor, I'll be fine.
Oh my God.
So let me ask you this in all seriousness, because it's been a minute since this guy has said anything about, I should hope they're done by autumn. Oh, I hope I'm done. It's been literally years since he's given any kind of yearly update like he used to. And I think it's because he got tired of getting to the last little bit and having to start over from scratch or rewrite or do. The fact that he does this, I do think... The fact that now that the series is over and whatever kind of mental hurdle that was on his back, the fact that he's making a statement that obviously is facetious, but the fact that he's making a public statement like this and opening himself up to all the criticism that it kind of died down makes me think that maybe this is actually in the hands of an editor. 2020, summer 2020 is a year away. A year and a month away, 13 months away.
Oh, poor fan Aaron. He's getting duped yet again.
Could be.
Look, I'll believe it when I see it. At this point, I take nothing he says seriously. It's all with a dump truck full of salt, and I'll believe it when I see it.
Because the other thing is, I think one of the reasons he stopped giving yearly updates, this is just a theory. Maybe we can talk about your guys' feedback on my theory. Is that I think that he decided to work on Fire and Blood as kind of like a get over the hump. This is the thing I want to write. This is the thing I'm thinking about. This is something that I can get out that doesn't impact anybody's understanding, but might give me some creative juices. It might give me some ability to test some certain scenarios out, and then I can look even smarter by pulling from this fake history to resolve my books. And I feel like that it would take about that long to finish something like Fire and Blood. We know the first volume's done. The second volume's coming out later this year. Once he got that done, and if that did the trick, and he started writing after writing 700-some pages on Fire and Blood, maybe, I don't know. You're right. I'm probably a sucker. I'm just saying that this is the first kind of something new coming out of George. Like, he's a dormant fucking volcano, and it's starting to rumble again.
Gotcha.
So he's either setting himself up for, a bitter wave of fan backlash, the likes the world has never seen next summer, or he might actually deliver something. We will see, as they say, as we say, as you all say. So say we all. To mix our science fiction fantasy metaphors. So as Jim mentioned, Anthony and I sat down yesterday and we recorded just under a half hour of the objective is, so we've seen the show. Most people believe that the big picture parts of the show, like Dany turning evil, Jon having to stop her, a lot of these things are probably straight from Martin. So what Anthony and I decided to do is go back and look at all the things that the Double Ds have pared away from the series as we gone in those last 3 or 4 years, put those back on the table and think, how could these same plot points resolve with the stuff that George has still got, and maybe a more satisfying in a more satisfying way. So without further ado, my co-author for Gods of Thrones, Anthony, and I will be discussing that.
And this is where all the people who are watching live on video get to go re-listen to the podcast.
Yep. If you want to hear, it starts at minute 6 or minute 5, tight 30, whatever. Okay. So yeah, that was our ideas on that. And unless you have anything you want to talk about, Jim, I think we can get back to feedback.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, if you'd like to send feedback, we're going to have at least one more show, the wrap-up. We might have a spoiler wrap-up. Depends on how much interest there is in wrapping up. But it's Game of Thrones at baldmove.com if you want to get that in. And we'll start. Alex F. I live in England, and as the show is broadcast at about 3 in the morning here, one of the hardest things for me to do consistently has been to avoid spoilers on the show. And although I've been pretty successful in this last episode, or up until this last episode, I was entirely ruined by YouTube. I casually clicked on the front page, and the first recommended video was called Jon Kills Daenerys. I didn't watch the video, but the title completely gave it away.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to stay off the internet, period.
You kind of do.
There's no place you can go. Official channels. Go to, Netflix. Go to Amazon. Go to Walmart.com. But anywhere else where fans reside is going to spoil you.
Here's the thing that I haven't seen discussed that happened to me this season, and it didn't actually lead to spoiling because it was involving a leaked episode that we had already, and by the time I saw it, I'd already seen the leaked episode, so it didn't spoil me. But my fucking Google Assistant, which is just this thing that essentially tries to learn my reading proclivities and bring to me stuff that I think is interesting, that it would think it's interesting, started giving me stuff from this leaked shit. And I don't know, I don't want to stop using Google Assistant, and I don't know how to train it for spoilers, but holy shit, they need to figure out that technology pretty quick, or it's going to piss off a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I have you have my sympathy there, Alex. Anyway, he continues, because this isn't actually what they wanted to talk about. When I eventually watched the episode, my knowledge didn't feel like a burden at all. It was fascinating to watch the episode as it moved through the scenes, building up to the actual moment itself. The Nazi Unsullied were particularly cool, and I thought we saw John's face. And though we saw John's face throughout, we never knew quite what he was thinking. I was fully convinced that John killing her would not happen until the end of the episode. Even when he said, "You are my queen," and the music swelled, I never would have guessed that the episode would kill its main antagonist that early in the episode, and so it took me by surprise. But here's where it went wrong. The whole section of the episode after this brilliantly depicted downfall of this new tyrant was boring and played mostly for laughs, such as Edmure's slapstick sword. Why do you think I came all this way was a stupid plot point, and as a musician, I can tell you that the music that accompanied it at the newly major chord that resolved as Bran was speaking was clearly a half-hearted attempt to make the audience forget that none of it made sense nor was set up. My question then is this. Do you think that a Game of Thrones that ended with the death of the Dragon Queen and then finished on an ambiguous plot point would have been more satisfying than the attempt to get a happy ending resolution that we got? If so, what would be the ambiguous ending that you would think would work best if you were writing the episode, assuming all the plot points until Dany's death remained the same?
Ambiguous endings are ballsy.
Especially on a plot-driven thing like this.
Yeah, I often find that I like some saccharine moments at the end of my series to kind of reflect on, where we've all been together. Sopranos was able to get away with it, I think. Pulled it off pretty successfully.
It pissed a lot of people off in the moment, yeah.
It did, but it felt so right for that series. I mean, just the character of Tony is I feel like the ambiguity worked there for me, but on this to just end with, Daenerys being killed would have been, or like if they ended with that scene and they maybe put a stabbing sound effect in there or something and went to black and just never came back from it. I think people would have rioted.
Yeah, because there's just a lot. That's not the end of the story.
Right. There's so much more to wrap up.
What are the Unsullied going to do? What are the Dothraki going to do? What are the Targaryen? For better or worse, the stuff that came after was an attempt to explain frequently asked questions about what happened next in the world. Some of those answers were lazy, some of them were rushed, some of them didn't feel earned, some of them felt entirely antithetical to what we know about this universe, but they were sincere attempts. Yeah, I don't think you can get away with kind of a shrug. Oh, what do you think it's going to mean? Like if they'd ended even with Drogon melting the Iron Throne, that would have been better than ending like a fade to black with Jon Snow stabbing her in the heart.
It would have said something about the future of the world.
Yeah, and people could have argued what all that meant. I don't know. I just think that your instinct is right, that an ambiguous ending, especially on a season, because nothing's in a vacuum, right? At this point in the season, the average fan, it seems, I don't want to speak for everyone, but the average fan seems like they were not enjoying the ride they were on. You then essentially punt the ending. I think that's just, you add cowardice to all the other charges that you lay before the Double Ds. So, they would have had to structure things a hell of a lot different in this last two seasons if they wanted to go for an ambiguous, turn to the audience, what do you think kind of ending.
Yeah, because I think the story is about more than just a single character. So like when you do an ending like The Sopranos that is basically just about this one guy, you can kind of leave his fate up in the air and have fans like speculate on it. And I think it works a little better, but you need to kind of wrap up, like, where does this leave Sansa? And because that scene as an ending would have only kind of clarified where you leave Jon and Daenerys, but not even really that, right? Because they've set so much up about Jon and the throne, and does he want it, and can he even have it? Like, there are just too many unanswered questions at the end of this, I think.
Right. And some of this was just expectations that are, I think, fairly set. Like, George has always said, like, this is my response to loving The Lord of the Rings, but wanting to know, like, what actually, if you take out Aragorn's a king because he's a good king and he reigns justly, what does that mean? How would he get to the throne? How would he keep the throne? How would he... it's kind of like if we had a podcast where it's like, at the end of this podcast, you're going to be able to build a fully functional nuclear reactor. People are like, holy shit, that's ambitious. That's audacious. Like, that's what George said when he goes, I'm going to tell an improved, modern, adult version of Lord of the Rings. And then at the end of the podcast, what we've actually taught you how to do is to make like one of those science fair volcanoes that shoot vinegar and baking soda and make fake lava. Like, people would be like, what the fuck? It's not so much that this isn't a cool volcano, although I think in this volcano's case, there's a lot of corners cut in the planning of it. But it's just like the buildup didn't justify the end result, and nobody, was forcing these gentlemen to give these interviews, these self-congratulatory interviews, and like in the midpoint of the script when everybody's like, this is fucking amazing, it's like no one's ever seen, can't wait till end to continue that. I mean, we see what happened. People are disappointed. Anything else, or should we move on?
Let's keep going.
Brandon J. Was I the only one that found the entire King's Landing scenes to be jumping back and forth between snow and ash falling? No, you were not. Let's just get that out of the way up front. I understand Dany's visions in the Warlock's Tower. Her vision was confusing as to whether it was ash or snow. Then she goes outside, and there's clearly snow where Drogon, the unborn baby, are in the tent. Here's my way of looking at it. The weather and sky. The weather went from blue skies and a warm setting during the fight of King's Landing to overcast, dreary, and apparently snowstorm look. Clothes. During the King's Landing War, the Dothraki are their typical cutoffs and vest. In the final episode, they're back to wearing the winter gear of long sleeve furs and hats. The final scene between Dany and Jon, if you watch closely, you can see breath coming out of their mouths, indicating cold weather. I understand many shows film in the winter, as did this one, for the look and the lighting. I particularly know that they extended the time off to film more time during the winter. 4, the ash constantly fell. I get the entire place burnt down, and we don't know the properties of Dragonfire, but this ash continued to fall the entire episode. I know there are sections of the building still standing above her in the throne room, but how much ash is left to fall down? Here's what I think. Because it began to snow in King's Landing in the final moments of Season 7, those scenes were shot early in the process where the writers originally expected to have snow covering the ground due to winter. This accounts for a number of the Dothraki and Unsullied still alive following the Winterfell. I think the writers abandoned this idea. Winter-like conditions in King's Landing proceeded with the blue skies and warmer weather, but they had already filmed those scenes. Okay, so there's a lot of people debating whether it was snow, whether it was ash. To me, a lot of the stuff looked like snow. In particular, the
I
scene
think I agree. Yeah.
where John was walking up and Drogon was kind of shaking this piles of snow and or ash or dust and rubble off of him. That looked very much like snow. And you're also right that the environment completely changed. And I do think there was a little bit of, trying to depict King's Landing a little bit more austere this year because winter was coming and, it's not going to be as lush and green as it used to be. But I think they're going for something more thematic, like that Dany coming is as bad in some ways as the Night King and had to be stopped just as assuredly. And this is just, the remaining chill from winter coming with Dany. There's also like a nuclear kind of fallout that I think they're going for. Like if dragons are the nukes of the time, then even if probably literally this wouldn't happen, they're trying to depict like this post-nuclear winter bleakness.
Yeah, I like that as thematically Dany is just bad.
Yeah.
That works.
But I other than that, I mean, there's still a lot of people that are just like insisting that it's all ash and this was all like paying off the division of and that's fine too, because honestly, I don't really care to debate the point that strongly. Moving on, Jennifer P. As I contemplated the meaning and logistics of Bran being named king while also being the three-eyed raven, it occurred to me that they can seemingly live for a very long time. Brynden Rivers was approximately 125 years old when the Night King killed him. He was born in 175 AC, or after the conquest, and he died at 302. Could Bran live this long or longer? Will the realm want the same ruler for that long?
Yeah, that's why I asked in the main podcast, like, how long do we think Bran's going to live without the Night King being around? Because I don't know how long the other three-eyed raven would have lived.
Well, it's also kind of like, I mean, that's a complex question, because like on Star Trek Deep Space Nine, you had the symbiotes, right? These, what were they? They're
The Trill.
Trills. And I wasn't one of the side effects of implantation that the Trills had a little bit more robust health.
It could have been.
But it's because like even if the individual Trill lived like, okay, let's say a Trill lives 75, 80 years and an implanted Trill lives 100, 120. The real thing is the symbiote continues to live for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I think that the three-eyed ravens, certainly in the books, if you look at them, like the Brynden Rivers is not like just an old man. He's literally grown into a tree. There's a tree root growing out of his eye sockets. There's roots impregnating his body. He's like skeletal and like half rotted looking. And then if you go to further into this cave, there's bones littering all over the place, implying that there's just generations of these three-eyed ravens that have served this Weirwood network. And we also know that they all kind of merge into this shared consciousness. That's how Bran has all this knowledge. So it's almost like, is the three-eyed raven 125 years? Is he 5,000 years old? Like the entity that's known as the three-eyed raven? Is it like the symbiotes in Star Trek, where like the host is influenced by the symbiote and the symbiote's influenced by the host, so each successive host changes it in some important ways? I don't know.
I think as it relates to the king, though, like once Bran's human form is either deteriorated to the point where he's no longer recognizable as a human being, or he just straight up dies, I think that's when they're going to go and pick their new king, right? Like they're not going to say, oh, well, this tree thing that's in the throne room now is still our king, right. And if somebody else comes up and like merges with it, they're the new king. They get to choose their king in the dragon pits, right? So
I don't know, because like that scenario reminds me a lot of like the Warhammer 40K lore, where you've got this emperor who's sat on this throne, this golden throne, and he's literally just a desiccated mummy. But people insist that there's still something about him alive, and he's doing something important for the and like if Bran would live like 100 years as a recognizable human being, being able to talk, and then he slowly deteriorated, but there was a few people that said they could hear his thoughts, or they could they could be the speakers for Bran the Broken or whatever. Like, you almost have a religion that forms around it, which is essentially, like, honestly, the religion of the North is kind of like this religion formed around this Children of the Forest weirwood worship, this tree worship. So, like, but that goes to the uncomfortable questions about putting Bran on the Iron Throne. Like, when you're putting a demigod up there, what the hell does that say? Like, what if a religion's formed around him? What if it's formed around him against his will? What if he is, like, what if the Weirwood Spirit doesn't like what's happening? How could they change that? Like, those are super interesting things that maybe a sequel series could pick up. Like, I would love to see a series set 100 years after the Long Night Part 2, just to see what the fuck is going on in Westeros. How are the Starks going? Like, 3 generations removed from Sansa, how is Winterfell looking? I'm almost more interested in that than some of the prequel stuff, honestly. But I don't know. I think also George, understandably, is reticent to let people play in that space because he's not done with it yet.
Sure.
If he had been done in the books, like, maybe we could have these sequels, or I don't know. Matthew A. You made the comment that if Bran were to become king in the books, he would perhaps be a more authoritarian ruler, drawing on the parallels in 1984. It made me think of another literary character that would closely parallel if he was both the Three-Eyed Raven and the king, which is the God Emperor of Dune. Whew, heavy on God Emperors this episode. In Herbert's Dune series, the God Emperor is a result of a 1,000-year breeding project. The God Emperor is the son of a noble family like Bran that is transformed into something not human like Bran and rules the million-planet empire. He is, as the God Emperor, all-knowing, including the future, which it seems Bran is as well. He lives and rules for some 5,000 years, which I believe at least one theory suggests was the age of the last Three-Eyed Raven. No, like we just talked about it, the last Three-Eyed Raven was inhumanly long life, but not to that extent. Unless you want to say the Three-Eyed Raven is this long heritage of green seers and children of the forest going back millennia. This God Emperor is also a dictator. His rule is authoritarian and entirely necessary to save humanity from an outside threat to everyone's existence. Convenient. For all those 5,000 years, you just got to go along with the Emperor because he's saving you. It would be an interesting parallel, especially if Bran was made God King before going to defeat the others. I've always heard on the internet that Gurm borrows from history and literature, and I'm curious if you find Bran's possible parallel if made king to the God Emperor of Dune compelling. That's honestly the main theme of the book Anthony and I wrote, that yes, Gurm does borrow from history and literature. I think in the books, if Bran does sit on the throne, there's no fucking way that George Martin doesn't get into the nitty-gritty of what all that means. And if it's scary, it's going to seem scary. If it's kind of like, I guess, I feel the same way about pervasive, super intelligent artificial intelligence. You know, like, I'm excited to see it get here, but I'm also very afraid of it. And I think that anybody seeing Bran, anyone that knows the real deal about Bran, him sitting on the Iron Throne, should be something that you are feeling appropriately awe and dread of.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good that could come from an all-knowing being sitting on the throne, and there's a lot of bad. I mean, you have to look no further than some of our dystopian sci-fi movies that our puny human brains have come up with to figure that out. I think we compared it to Minority Report the other day.
He's also very, like, a good analogy would be like Dr. Manhattan from The Watchmen, like a guy who's just losing his humanity because how the fuck do I even relate to these primates anymore?
Yeah.
And I think that is all going to be part and parcel. But the thing is even with George, all you can do is hint to those fears, because unless you're going to do a 50-year flash forward, you're not going to know whether Bran the Broken sits and rules as this perfectly compassionate AI cyborg, or whether he loses all of his humanity and just, turns evil. Those are super interesting questions. I wish the show could have even started to grapple with, but well,
he didn't get to do his 5-year flash forward, so maybe he'll get to do a 50-year flash forward.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, but then the problem with that is he'll start writing it and he'll be like, "Oh God, I can't figure out how these people. You know what? I need to write
the 50 years between
a series
now and
of
then.
17 books that will explain.
Oh Christ,
how we got there." And they're going to be exclusively for the VR headsets. It's going to be an exclusive Sony PlayStation 7 headset deal. Turner V. I noticed an unlikely connection to one of the former Targaryen kings. Aegon V, the Unlikely, better known as Egg, began his reign by sending his trusted friend and advisor Brynden Rivers to the wall. Aegon felt like he was obligated to do this to preserve trust in the crown. Brynden had murdered a Blackfire, just for the non-book readers, this is a offshoot branch of the Targaryens that was involved in several civil wars previous to the Baratheon period. He murdered a Blackfire in the capital. It was there under the promise of protection and truce. Bloodraven sacrificed his honor for the good of the realm. Like Jon, it was necessary to preserve the peace. I find there's an interesting parallel here, but honestly, I think they might have accidentally backed into this similarity. Yeah, I think it is kind of interesting that Aegon, who is the rightful Targaryen king, sent the Three-Eyed Raven to the wall. Well, he wasn't even the Three-Eyed Raven at the time. He became the Three-Eyed Raven, and now you've got the Three-Eyed Raven coming back from the north to support the actual Targaryen king, who's also named Aegon. And you can start to see like the little shapes of George doing that and paying himself tribute and having this symmetry, and it's just sketched out in the show. But I like what you're laying down here, Turner. Mm-hmm. What about you, Jim?
Yeah, I like it. Nice symmetry.
Richard E. Varys' hypothesis, which Tyrion went with, is that the best ruler would be someone who doesn't want a job. But hasn't this been tried in Westeros not too long ago? Robert Baratheon never wanted to be king. He was so named because all the rebelling lords said he had the best claim. His disinterest continued, and he left the running of the kingdom to his small council, specifically his hand Jon Arryn, while he pursued his other interests such as hunting. This was a disaster, as the king's lack of interest allowed the power-hungry like Cersei and Littlefinger to scheme their ways into power. Fast forward to 8 seasons, and Bran is now king, but he has no interest in ruling. He checks out 5 minutes into his very first small council meeting to go hunting for Drogon. This leaves the small council, specifically his hand Tyrion, to put the realm back together after this long and costly war. Is this semi-democracy in Westeros doomed before it starts, like the beginning of the Baratheon dynasty? Yeah, I mean, I don't think that not wanting to be king is the only qualification for king. Like, I think what you're supposed to understand, Tyrion, is like you take the best candidates for king, and then you make the one that most doesn't want to be king.
Yeah, there's a combination of not wanting to be the king, but also when appointed the king, will take the responsibility seriously.
Right.
That's the person you're looking for. Now, you make a strong case that Bran is not that person.
Yes.
Because Bran, like you said, checks out of the small council meeting and goes Drogon hunting. Yeah, but I don't know. It's tough to judge him based on one small council meeting.
But that's wild, this because I do feel like there's several points in this episode when maybe it's because I know a lot of book knowledge and I've been thinking about like in lines like, you know, that Richard and Turner have been thinking, and Matthew, the God Emperor guys. But I just felt like a lot of this episode, and I watched it again in between Tuesday and now, a lot of this stuff with Bran the Builder just seems like it's setting off flashing alarm bells that the show itself is not aware of. Like just the fact that he's like, oh, I mean, we've talked about it, but the whole, oh, why do you think I'm here? Like that was almost like a joke, but it just gives so much of what Bran's done in the last 2 seasons a dark undertone.
Oh yeah,
overtone, midtone, all the tones, dark. But the show doesn't get it. Like it's playing hopeful, triumphant music when it should be chilling. I don't know. That's just the season we got, man.
Real quick, so I talked about in the full podcast on Tuesday how I was a little disappointed in the, let's say, lesser fulfillment of Bran's like you won't walk but you'll fly, that kind of like prophecy, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Having been fulfilled, you know, seemingly seasons ago. Is this some like implied greater fulfillment that he's going to warg into Drogon to find out where Drogon is, and this is the Bran warging into the dragon that we always wanted to see, but we don't actually get to see it?
I mean, I'm not going to give them that credit, because if even if I granted it, it just makes me madder.
Sure. I'm not saying it's
Yeah.
great or anything. I'm just wondering if that's how I'm supposed to be reading that
I
moment.
just don't, because honestly, like sometimes I try to be fair, and I'm like put myself in the Double D shoes, and they're rich dudes, and they're over this, and they didn't sign up for this, and like, but they still feel like contractual obligation and some kind of I don't know, like in the writing room how backslappy they got. Because if they're like really backslappy about like, oh man, we are just going to knock these fuckers dead, and oh, cherry on top is we're going to imply that Bran's going to warg into Drogon. That's going to set people. Like if they just didn't read the room and they were thinking these were Easter eggs or cherries on top rather than just kind of vaguely insulting bones to be thrown to us SpoiLore type people, I don't know. And it's probably not fruitful to try to get in their minds that much, All
right.
But yeah, like if it's true, I'm almost more pissed than if it's not.
Okay.
Aaron C. If Sam is a full-fledged maester, let alone Grand Maester, doesn't this imply he dumped Gilly, little Sam, and abandoned his unborn child? Maesters aren't allowed to have family. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just left him over at Hornhill, huh?
Yeah, or at the Citadel, or I don't know, or maybe. Here's the thing: like Bran's the king, he can do whatever the fuck he wants. Like that's one thing that the Fire and Blood make abundantly clear is that the kings can really do whatever they want, and it's just about finding the right people in power to look the other way or to start supporting them. Because like the Targaryens incest thing was just a massive cultural problem in Westeros, and it wasn't until they co-opted the Faith of the Seven and essentially threatened, bullied, cajoled, and put their own septons in place that started specifically preaching like, hey, Targaryens are just better than us and they get to do things like, if you're a bull, you can't criticize a lion for eating meat because he's a lion and he's designed to do that, and you're just a bull, so eat your fucking grass or the lion might kill you. Yeah, so if Bran's a fucking demigod on the throne, and if he wants his half brothers, cousins, best friend to be his advisor, he's just going to make that happen. And if he needs to bring his kids to the capital and they need to smooth all that over, and it's just a finding that, hey, it turns out maesters can get married after all, it's going to happen.
So what you're saying is there's still hope for Pod the Rod.
There is.
That he can put that thing to use.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, he's going to father bastard children, if nothing else, for sure. For sure. With the there's not a moon tea in the world to keep his bastards out of Flea Bottom. Lindsay B. I find it interesting that Brienne left Sansa, a girl she swore to protect in her main mission for many seasons, to go to King's Landing and join the Kingsguard. Wouldn't she stay to serve as Sansa's head guard, and why would she just ditch Sansa for Bran? What is more appealing to Brienne about serving in King's Landing than the North? Hold on a second.
Hello? No, I don't think so.
When is this actually?
Next Wednesday at the AMC in Westchester.
Do you? Because I haven't gotten mine either. It's screening. It's Wednesday advanced screening of Godzilla King of Monsters.
Really? Over in Westchester?
There's a couple groups. There's a couple groups you can follow on Facebook. Owens Media, Cincinnati Free Movies. They put up codes every so often.
All right. Yeah, we need to figure out how to get in on this. So yeah, if you're not using this, we'll definitely use it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, what's your name again?
Chris.
Chris, I appreciate you thinking of us.
Awesome.
Yep, I'm Aaron, and this is my partner Gino. So
Nice to meet you.
but yeah, hopefully we'll. What was the two groups you said? It was Cincinnati Free Movies and
Cincinnati Free Movies and Owens Media. There's trying to think if there's any other ones off the top of my head, but those are the two that constantly put up most of them.
all right, cool. Thanks, Chris.
Need a
Appreciate it.
oysters, clams, and cockles thing to play here.
Meeting our office mates. Okay. Where the hell were we?
I have no idea.
Someone in chat, tell us where were we?
Someone in chat.
Oh, were we in the middle of this Lindsay? Let's start over Lindsay B, because
Okay.
it's the whole Brienne leaving Sansa and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, next email, Lindsay B. I find it interesting that Brienne left Sansa, a girl she swore to protect in her main mission for many seasons, to go to King's Landing and join the Kingsguard. Wouldn't she stay to serve as Sansa's head guard? Why would she just ditch Sansa for Bran? What's more appealing to Brienne about serving in the King's Landing than in the North? I haven't heard many comments about this. Most people are happy she was able to finally get recognized as this amazing knight that she is. In my opinion, it would be more in character for her to serve as something similar to the Kingsguard for Sansa, Queen's Guard. Her duty and oaths were to Catelyn, then to Sansa. Okay.
I feel like you're putting a life debt on Brienne here. Like, how much
Brienne is a
safer?
Wookiee confirmed.
Yeah, how much safer under her Phasma armor? She's actually a Wookiee.
Yeah.
And how much safer can Sansa be?
Yeah.
Like, how much more can she protect the daughters of Catelyn Stark?
I mean, Brienne's a top 5 swords person in Westeros, so like, unless she's got one of the top 4.
But you know what's better than the top, one of the top 5 swordsmen?
Having
a hundred bottom 100 swordsmen. Like,
being in the middle of a kingdom that's never been invaded in the entire history of Westeros by the South, that's full of people that just are ecstatic that they have a fucking Stark back on the throne. It seems like their heads are screwed on straight. One of Ned Stark's own goddamn daughters. Like,
your brother on the throne in King's Landing.
I pity the fool that tries to do something to Sansa. Like, they better have a goddamn dragon.
I think Brienne has fulfilled her obligation to the Starks.
And honestly, like, Sansa can discharge her. Like if she's
she could.
If they chose to show this on the show, I would bet it would go down as like Sansa's like, I think you should go. I'm safe. Because here's the other thing: if I'm Brienne, do I want to stay in Winterfell, which is the memory of where I got knighted, but it's also the memory where I lost a lot of people I cared about in combat, and the person I loved most broke my heart, and I'm just going to stay there in my quarters that I shared with this man? Or do I want to go to King's Landing, which is, Kingsguard is the preeminent position for a knight, in this society. So I think Brienne would want to do that. I think Bran would want to have her there. I think Brienne would like, if I'm just getting in her head for a moment, a change in scenery. So this is kind of like if you had a job you loved in a city and then your boyfriend broke your heart and you also got a professional advancement and you had the opportunity to move from like Boston to Seattle. I think a lot of people would say that the Seattle has a lot of attractive qualities to just getting away, changing the scenery, putting some distance behind you, both metaphorically, temporally, and distantly. So, and then if a Sansa wouldn't let her out if she asked for that, like you said, because she's totally safe, she'd be kind of an asshole. So, I didn't think, like, there's a lot of things I thought Brienne got done dirty on, but being the first female Lord Commander in the history of the post, I think is as fitting an end as they could give her from what they had. Okay, possibly related comment, Haley. I want to double down on some of the sexist complaints and argue that while it might not be an outright sexist episode of television, it certainly feels like it was written by a bro-y pair of dudes who didn't consider the female perspective. In a show that as recently...
To be fair, there's a lot of things I didn't consider.
Yes.
But yes, that might be one of them.
In a show that as recently as last season had pretty much every region led by a powerful, if not also nuanced and multidimensional, interesting woman, the show ended with, save for Arya, every woman's plot determined by a man. The most repulsive display of this is obviously Tyrion pushing Jon to decide Daenerys' fate for her. Jon, knowing Dany trusts him, was then stabbing her in the heart, and her realization of one final and permanent betrayal did resonate with me, but only as the betrayal. It left me angry at Jon, and likely that's because I was never fully sold on Dany's evil turn. The simple fact of this man that she trusts betraying her takes away not only her autonomy and is indefensible for Jon's honor. My larger point here is that Jon could not have killed another man this way. Pretty much no man could be killed this way, at least that we've seen in years on Thrones. Now,
Renly, maybe.
I was going to say, well, I also think that they had enough good, deep male friendships that I could see, like I could see Ned Stark doing this to Bobby B. Like, I can't imagine a situation
bear
like
hug
coming in for like a bro hug or a and then like using that closeness as a physical closeness to betray. I could see Jon and Theon doing that. I could see it's starting to get hard because there aren't a lot of these type of relationships. But I think But the fact is, the Double D's never. Even if they had these relationships, they could have done it. I don't think it would ever. Your point, larger point, Haley. I don't think they ever would have considered having that, like a man using his physical closeness and affection to another man to betray him in this way. Then we've also seen the most obvious display. Although I will say that there was that male prostitute that betrayed Loris.
Yeah.
But that was just a nakedly kind of a craven betrayal engineered by Littlefinger. So it's not clearly the same thing. Then we have the most obvious display, the small council scene. There's one woman out of 6 men. Of course, we've seen this on the show before, and we've made so much more progress from those points that to me it was jarring. As a woman viewing the show and identifying the female characters, to see that there is but one left governing in King's Landing was honestly a jaw drop. I naively expected a gender-balanced small council as Tyrion arranged the chairs. Yes, the show killed all the women and had the survivors narratively doing other things, and this scene was enjoyable, but for God's sake, it ended on a discussion of brothels as a top priority. And the only woman who did in fact argue had just closed her chapter by writing positively about the man who betrayed her. I can't find anything wrong with the broad strokes of your criticism here, because the show got a lot of praise last year when we talked about Dany's council and how it was all kind of underprivileged people. It was a former slave. It was a eunuch, 2 eunuchs. It was a dwarf. It was 3 powerful women that kind of led their people in their own right. And that was kind of new and exciting. And we thought the show thought along with us a positive development. But then, yeah, when you essentially have very poor representation in the final scene and ends in a joke about brothel, it's a fair way for a woman to interpret those scenes.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard for me to get myself into that headspace because I don't have the perspective on it.
Right.
So I don't want to put up too much of a fight and say, oh, here's counterexamples. But like, I guess, yeah, me as a viewer, I was not thinking those things, but of course I wouldn't be, right? I'd probably be the guy in the room not thinking about how to write these women appropriately.
Right. It's just like, and I don't think that Double D's intend to do this. I don't think they're malicious about this. It's just the same. These are the same guys that thought 3-4 years ago the thing that they most wanted to do, because the times they live in, was tell a tale about what if the American South had won the American Civil War. Like, that's it's not, honestly, if you're a white dude, it's not an obvious reason why that is a bad idea. If the Double D's had a single black person in the room, they probably could have said, like, whoa, that's kind of fucked up, and like consider what it would feel like to watch that if you're from this perspective. And I think that's one of the reasons why we need a bunch of different perspectives in writers' rooms, because unless you are trying to make entertainment that appeals exclusively for men, and like the occasional women that can overlook these kind of things, if you're trying to make stuff that's wish fulfillment and empowering for everybody, you have to listen. You have to give these perspectives their due. And yeah, it's ahistorical for a woman to be on the small council, probably, if you want to like go back. But that's also not even necessarily true, because history is replete with nations being led by powerful women in all kinds of terms of antiquity. You know, you're talking about prehistoric, historic. Like it's history is a lot more diverse than I think people often give it credit for. And if you're telling a modern fantasy story, do you want to be slavishly following the conventional view of antiquity, or do you want to tell something that's a little bit more hopeful and optimistic? Those are all individual choices that creators make, but then people are free to criticize the creators for making them. So yeah, I can see why you're bummed out, Haley, and I wish it had been a little bit more balanced myself. Josh F. There is plenty of evidence that there are lands west of Westeros. We're going to have a severe change from the political and the sociological to the geographical. The Proto-Ironborn who first settled the Iron Islands were said to be from lands west of Westeros. There are certainly lots of islands in that direction. At the very worst, Arya would run back into the most eastern part of Essos that no one has ever explored and reported back on, unless we believe in the flat planetos theory, and she just falls off the map. I don't think that world could possibly exist, even with dragons and magic and all that. We also know there's a South Thoros continent confirmed, so it's definitely not just Westeros and Essos. Okay. Fire and Blood had this guy, this Valerian guy who was like this, like he went on these 7 voyages of Sinbad type of discovery, and he sailed as west as anybody ever had, and he reported that like after you sailed for like a week or two, you started coming across these other islands that apparently had creatures on them and people. And I feel like that George Martin, and this is just my speculation, it's based on reading The World of Ice and Fire and all the other stuff and the stuff he said in So Spake Martin archive. But it seems like that he was setting, like you're supposed to understand that Westeros is kind of Great Britain, you know, and Scotland and Wales, and that you've got, you know, Essos is broadly the rest of Europe and even North Africa. And it would, to me, what he's trying to tell the story of is if you sail west, you're eventually going to run into like the West Indies, or what we call the Caribbean and the Bahamas, and eventually North America, South America. But they just haven't got that far yet. They being the people from Westeros. I'm not saying that nobody I'm not saying there's not native people there that know about it. I'm not saying that there's people from way east of Essos are here. I'm just saying that like in the Westeros and the Citadel, the Maesters, their knowledge doesn't extend to that. So I think that they're hinting at that you're arriving at another continent that and that you're just supposed to lay this 1-to-1 on our world, which is that's always been an interesting choice. Because like it feels like it leaves a World of Ice and Fire to like people speculate that this is actually Earth, you know, just like from a way like a long time ago we've forgotten kind of thing.
Right.
But George has always said that like that's not what he intended. I don't know, but it also, you know, gives the world a real lived in feel because it's based on a real world. Stacy S. In reference to the exclusion of Tyrion from A Song of Ice and Fire, I thought that this was supposed to be a callback to something Varys said. After the Battle of the Blackwater, Varys says to Tyrion, "The histories won't mention you." I thought it wasn't meant to be so much about Tyrion's vanity, but one more thing Varys is right about. Did I read too much into it?
I mean, that might be the case. It still doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Because here's the thing. Varys said that in a particular context, which was Tyrion had just heroically acted to kind of save King's Landing, and that he bought King's Landing enough time for his father to come in to actually save King's Landing. And then he spent the first 2 weeks of that period in a coma. He wakes up and his father and sister have stripped him of all of his power and solidified their own. So at this point in time, Tyrion could have been relegated to a very minor figure. You know, like he was Hand the King, but he was acting hand for Tywin. But post that, when he kills the Hand of the King, when he's suspected of killing the king himself, when he flees to a foreign land, when he joins as to this other queen's retinue and becomes the hand of her queen, when he comes back over the Westeros and is the hand overseeing the invade, there's just those are no longer the same thing. So if the Double Ds were trying to pay off Varys' joke, then they didn't understand, or make a joke about Varys being right, then they didn't understand Varys and why he was right in the first place.
Yeah.
Which I'm open to.
Sure.
I'm open to them not understanding the vagaries of their own history and characters, but it doesn't make it more meaningful for me for sure. Manny V. Didn't Jaime and the Lannister army take out House Tyrell last season and jack all their gold to pay off the Iron Bank? They even confirmed all the gold got through the gates of King's Landing before Dany Dracarys them big time. Didn't sound like they left any left for Bronn to be throwing around now. Maybe the small folk are back to work and generating income again, but I doubtful they're anywhere near where they used to be. I mean, what do you think? Because I've got a intuitive answer to that. I don't have any deep lore based answer.
Yeah, I don't either. It sounds right to me though. I mean, all of that money should now be over with the Iron Bank. Yeah, all that gold.
Yeah. I think that's essentially what the scene where Tyrion says, do you consider all debts to Highgarden paid? Because if you retcon that as the crown taking out a loan from the Highgardens, or not a loan that they just took all their money, that was a loan, then Bronn saying in payment of being Lord of Highgarden, I am accepting. He's essentially sold out the people of the Reach for his own position of authority and power, which one of the many problematic aspects about making fucking Bronn Lord of Highgarden and Master of Coin. But the thing is the Reach didn't have, unlike the Lannisters, they weren't wealthy by virtue of sitting on piles of gold. They're wealthy by virtue of being massive and being the breadbasket for the realm, and having great growing conditions for wine, and being able to export a lot of like luxury goods and food and like they were an economic powerhouse. So they will continue to generate money. It's not like the Lannisters where they ran out of gold in the mines and now they're kind of fucked. They have to figure out another way to make. The Reach like is kind of like a cultural and agricultural powerhouse. So they will continue to make food and money and start rebuilding their things. And I think that's what now Tyrion's saying, hey, can we expect similar levels of taxation and tribute in the form of bread and conscripts for our armies and stuff that we and Bronn's like, yeah, sure, no problem.
Gotcha.
Little bit of I don't know, a little bit of it's a very simplified kind of political economic equation, but I think that's what they're trying to get at. Alejandro C. I was wondering what your guys' take on Dany's season 7 infertility talk with Jon. They had them hook up, and then they never mentioned her infertility again.
I mean, you just got to read it on its face then, yeah?
Yeah.
Like they're just having a conversation, and she says that she can't have children. And that's true, and it never comes into the story.
Is it kind of like wink, wink, sailor boy? We can the port's open.
Yeah, it could
you don't
be.
have to worry about leaving anything behind. To me, I think one of the reasons you had the long layoff is because that's when Dan and Dave really committed to some of these things. And like if I want to try, I think season 7 might be them trying to leave as many doors, as many pieces from George's stuff that they still had on the table that they could play with, and the way they ended the thing, you know, their version of their political interesting ending. So they wanted to have, like, obviously, because there was even one of the now that everything's said and done, like one of the bullet points we talked about at the beginning of this that wasn't true from last season is that Cersei had a miscarriage. They planned on having that in the series, but they changed their mind at the last minute. And it feels like maybe they wanted to keep as much stuff on the table, as much things as possible.
Man, that makes the 6-episode season extra insulting.
Yeah.
Because, like, okay, if you're going to leave open a shitload of possibilities,
Yeah.
you need to have the time. You need to leave yourself the time to close those possibilities down to a singularity at the end.
Yeah.
And they fucking didn't.
Yeah. But then also, like, that's kind of generous because I felt like the last 2 seasons were kind of a package deal. Like before, like at the end of season 6, HBO said, "How much time do you need to?" And they're like, "Oh, it feels like we have 13 hours or 13 to 15 hours." And I feel like a lot of those decisions were made now, which makes the Dany thing really. I mean, I don't know, because again, they had a year and a half off where they could fuck with this, and this is the result that we got. So. I don't know. I just know they flip-flopped on whether Cersei was pregnant or not, kind of, sort of, and it seems like they flip-flopped on Dany's infertility. Or not just flip-flopped on it, but it just didn't matter in the end.
Yeah.
So, but, I mean, man, just some of this stuff feels so ham-fisted and clumsy that maybe they justified that introduction just so Tyrion could say some things about democratic institutions so it wouldn't come out of left field. So like when so when Sam outright suggests it, people laugh, but then the lords are open to, okay, well, let's just reasonable as adults sit here and talk, and I don't know, but there's just so many things strange when I was watching that. Like it feels so self-conscious that like here are all the lords and ladies of Westeros. We don't know half of them. Because they've killed the other houses and didn't bother to replace them with anything compelling. So fully half the people sit around this table. It could have been the great John Umber. It could have been Dr. Julian Bashir from Dorne. Why can't I ever remember this guy's? Doran Martell. It could have been him sitting there. And like just those recognizable faces being serious and sober would have made it more powerful. But then you've got people like Davos saying like, well, fuck, I don't even know if I have a vote, but fuck it, vote. And then Brienne's like, yeah, fucking vote me. And then Pod's like, oh, what shit? Maybe I can. Like, what kind of fucking political processes this was? It was led by a condemned prisoner. It's just so like when I watched this for the 3rd time, I think it was, I just was struck by how bizarre and self-conscious it seemed, because they're calling attention to how kind of ridiculous some of this scene was, but yet they're also trying to play it straight as if, oh yeah, Tyrion just mind-fucked these dudes in 5 minutes into voting against their realm's best interests. So yeah, infertility is small potatoes. Ian S. While listening to your last episode, you wish there was some explanation of the dragon's intelligence or psychic connection to the writers or Targaryens in general. Interestingly, there seems to be some cut dialogue doing this very thing. In a hilarious outtake that I've linked below, Kit Harington is halfway through a take discussing how the dragon seemed to sense where he wanted to go while writing, followed by Amelia's starting another line with, well, not quite, before Kit slips and eats it. Lots of interesting things to be inferred from this abandoned half explanation. So I'll put this in the show notes, but there is a behind the scenes footage of like Jon and Dany walking after they both did their dragon ride, and just like Ian said, Jon Snow was saying something about trying to figure out how there is an intuitive connection, and then Dany was trying to explain it, like, well, you're not quite, but presumably she would go on and explain it, and then Kit tripped and fell, and they ended the take, and it was just a funny thing. But yes, there is at some point in the script, and they actually shot it, some explanation of this shit. Why the fuck this was cut? Why the fuck this was cut when we've got episodes running in at an hour 13, an hour 20? Like, what? When the climax of the series is the fucking dragon just making a political commentary,
Right.
on the real reason his mommy died, like this is the shit that frustrates the piss out of me.
Yeah. I'm with you.
They only had the one take where like who's fucking filming this? Ed Wood? Like, oh, in real life John would have fucking slipped and tripped there. And then the editor's like, well, I can't use it, so fuck it. I have no answer for you, Ian. But if you guys want to see that for yourself, it'll be in the show notes. Lisa E. I know it seems like the Double Ds don't give a damn about tying into prophecies, but I've been thinking about it and refamiliarizing myself with Dany's "the dragon has 3 heads" prophecy, and here is my attempt. So this is we've talked about this a lot this season, the triplet of triplets, where there's 3 fires you must light, one for life and one for death and one to love. Lisa says that the life is probably the funeral pyre for Drogon, which gave birth to the dragons. The fire she lights for death is her massacre of the cows. And for love, she says the pyre she lit after the long night, for example, mourning Jorah. I don't have a problem with that. Although I gotta say that for death, it seems like, since I don't think that Dany's not fireproof in Martin's world, number one. I don't think she's going to then magically have flame resistance as a way to defeat the Khalasar. I think she's just going to win them over. So I think the fire she lights for death is probably King's Landing.
I can just easily see that one being love.
Oh yeah,
it's not a fulfilled love. It's
from her perspective,
spurned love. Yeah. Like, these people don't love me. I'll never have the love in Westeros that I had.
Right.
Or that I wish that I would have.
To kind of leaning on that woman scorn trope to tell the story.
Yeah, that's not the best way to go, but
I mean, it doesn't mean that won't be a way that they do go.
Sure.
3 mounts you must ride: 1 to bed, 1 to dread, and 1 to love. To bed is Dany's silver horse that Khal Drogo got for her wedding present. That's pretty consensus choice. To dread, could this be her massacre of King's Landing on Drogon? And to love, is that Jon? I mean, the dread one, popular before this theory was the theory that her actually hopping on Drogon's back to flee the fighting pits of Meereen was her going off to dread, because she didn't have full control over Drogon. It was kind of a desperation move. But yeah, like emulating a city of 1 million people is pretty dreadful. Mm-hmm. And then 3 treasons you will know: 1 for blood, 1 for gold, and 1 for love. For blood, I see Viserys selling her off into exile, or her exiled days in general. I actually think that the blood treason is her kind of sham marriage to Hisdar Zolorak, which they didn't really do as much in the show. But in the books, it was heavily implied that he was the one bankrolling the Sons of the Harpies. There's this plot where he tried to get her to eat this bowl of honeyed locust, and she passes because she doesn't want to eat honeyed bugs. But her one of her Kingsguard queen kind of proto Queensguard, this strong Bellis guy ate a bunch, and he's this big hulking powerful man, and he almost died. Like, he was puking up his guts and blood. I think that the blood treason is his dark, because he's actually betraying her to reopen the fighting pits and to get the slave empire going again. I think that makes a lot more sense. Treason for gold, Jorah. That's pretty consensus pick. And then treason for love. If it turns out that Jon betrays her, then absolutely in the books that's got to be the treason. Yeah. And then she also ties it into the Nisa prophecy that we talked about in the main podcast. So I don't think we need to go into there. But yeah, I think that those, broadly speaking, are how that's going to shake out in George's version. Tosh. I just finished reading A Fire and Blood, and it made me wonder why the Targaryens are all labeled as mad when it seems that so far most of them, with the exception of perhaps Maegor, were pretty sane. Perhaps the madness will come in Volume 2, A Fire and Blood, but so far, in my opinion, the Targaryens come off as entitled, shitty leaders sometimes who are more concerned with succession than they are actually ruling the land. It seems that this theme of crazy Targaryens is played very heavily, especially in these last few episodes of Game of Thrones, but I'm just not seeing it. This whole idea of rolling the dice to see which of them will be sane and which will be mad, it just isn't supported in Fire and Blood. Also, aside from Maegor the Cruel and Aerys the Mad King, and now I guess Dany the Mad Queen, what evidence is that the Targaryens are madder than any of the other batshit crazy families in Westeros? For example, the Boltons. Man, I'm thinking like this isn't a prehistorical society, but it's a society where probably 90% of the people can't read. Like, living memory is such an important thing. If I just want to go in universe and try to explain this, because I think you're kind of right that there are Targaryens that do something that's like King Aegon, the good King Aegon, Egg, burnt the majority of the Targaryen house to death trying to bring dragons, like doing some kind of ritual to bring dragons back into the world. That's insane. Mm-hmm. But he was a good king and everybody liked him, and he just happened to buy into the Targaryens' magical exceptional thing. He did the same thing that Dany did, except for he was wrong and Dany was right. So, like, he's not really crazy. But if the last Targaryen king in living memory was just such a fucking crazy asshole like Aerys, and he burned so many noble people to death, and he had plans to burn the whole city down, and these are the legends about him, then I do think that, regardless of whether it's historically or true or not, that would be conventional wisdom. It's kind of like my grandfather would never buy a Japanese car and was quite angry when his grandkids started to do. He eventually got over it, whereas his grandkids didn't. Like, why the fuck would we not buy a Japanese car? But, you know, my grandfather's from the generation that had to go to war against Japan, and I was 2 generations removed from that. So... and I can read books and have access to news information and the internet. And so, like, I just think that if you put yourselves in the mind of the lords and ladies and small folk of Westeros, this Mad King shit makes more sense. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody else, but that's how I've retconned it. Ali C. Thinking back on the main issue in Season 7, the dumb fuck plan to kidnap a white and try to convince or trust Cersei, for God's sakes, I've begun to... You know what? I don't actually want to get into this. So, last minute striking. Glenn, I want to put in my 2 cents into what I wish the writers would have done for the ending to make it better. A show ends like it does, the credits roll and fade to black. A second or two later, we hear Drogon crooning, and the camera comes into focus on Kinvara, the red woman from Meereen, praying over Daenerys' dead body. And Drogon's in the background observing, of course. This camera slowly zooms in on Dany's face, and just like Jon Snow's scene from Season 6, his eyes open in shock, and she gasps. Fade to black with Drogon screaming. To me, this would have been the perfect Gurm-type ending that kind of leaves the story open in a horror movie-type trope. Mm-hmm. I think the problem with it is the last 4 words, horror movie-type trope, that they've already done. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I think I'm on board. I don't know. You know, leaving something ambiguous is one thing. Ending with a horror movie type trope is another. That's rough. I don't know if I would have liked that.
Because the thing is like, you only do that if you're baiting a sequel. because stories need to end. And also, like in the horror movie trope, because I've always long suggested that one of the reasons these things end this way is to leave your audience with, you want to have that kind of a happy ending where the monster gets beat, but also when they go home, you want them checking underneath their bed and in their closets. So you kind of imply that it's not over. You're not really baiting a sequel. It's more of like, hey, one last thing, this thing's still out there. Game of Thrones isn't doing that. They're not trying to bait a sequel, at least I don't think they are, and they're not trying to leave you with an unsettling feeling that Dany and her dragon and her crazy ass could still be out there. So to me, it would just be like you said, it's not an ambiguous ending. It's not an ending. It's saying that this story is still going on. It hasn't stopped. It's continuing, and there's still more to come, and you're never going to get it.
Yeah, which I mean, in the context of like the wheel, I don't know that that's like the worst way to end it. Certainly, to say that nothing has super changed in this realm. It's going to continue to have the political strife that it's had in the past. Putting Bran on the throne doesn't end essentially the human condition here.
Right.
So I don't know if it would have been the worst ending, but I don't know that it would satisfied me either.
Does that change how you feel about the Lord of the Light? Because it does feel like the Lord of the Light had some kind of active role in defeating the others. And then he didn't care much. He or she didn't care much beyond that.
Yeah, no, you're right.
And if Dany is then brought back to life by Red Priest, it suddenly calls into question that thesis.
Yeah, then you have to think, okay, well, what was the Lord of Light's real purpose here?
Or was the Lord of Light
And
never a
clearly-
real thing, and it's just a force that we don't understand wielded by mortals?
Yeah, could be.
And I don't know that that's kind of questions you want people to be asking at the conclusion of a tale, but I don't know. I'll let the audience decide. Kevin S. Forget the awful storytelling over Dany going mad. We never got to find out who the coward was that shit in Tormund's pants. Damn you, Double D's, leaving these plot threads dangling. You're right. We had a shit-slinging terrorist during a long night of all places at Winterfell, at the heart of the Resistance. We need to get to the bottom of this. That should have been reason A for Brienne to stay behind. Because what happens if someone shits in Sansa's pants?
Yeah. I mean, the trouble with it is the cowardice displayed by shitting in someone's pants is also the same cowardice that leads them to never confess.
Yeah.
They'll no matter how pegged you have them, they will never confess to shitting in your pants. So I don't know that we could get to the bottom of that. No, I'm wrong. Bran could get to the bottom of that. Bran can snap his fingers.
That's true.
Roll his eyes and know exactly who shit in Tormund's pants.
That's true. Tormund, where were you exactly when you were aware that your pants would be shit? And I'm going to rewind the VCR tape, and I'm going to play the CCTV. We're going to get to the bottom of this, buddy. We're going to get to the bottom of this pants shitting. I mean, that's essentially the plot for season 2 of what was that? That goddamn American Vandal.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It's the cowardly shitter. Hutch, is there any chance that Double D's learned the fate of a show? Okay, let me start again. Hutch asks, is there any chance that Double D's learned the fate of the show a few seasons back from George and they were just as disappointed as the rest of us? They seem like ready to be done with this, as evidenced by the shortened seasons and rushed storylines. They never seemed intent on writing a brand new ending, but only to adapt George's novels. Perhaps they're ready to be done with Game of Thrones because it's not only did George not finish the novels, but they were just as outraged and disappointed with his final bullet points, so they said, fuck it, let's make the best of the bad situation, wrap this up as quick as possible, and move on. Besides some other book characters left out, I imagine the ending was pretty much the same as what George was intending. I don't know, and they're not talking about it. It's my recollection that this meeting they had was well before, like that was like around the time of Dance of Dragons coming out. That they're like, hey, let us know so we can start da-da-da. And so, like, if they were outraged by Dany being an evil queen, I think they would have checked out in season 3, or certainly by 4. And I still think, like a lot of people have difference of agreement. I think there is the first 3 seasons that are like 100%, and then season 4 is like 95%, and then season 5 is a pretty steep drop off from that. Season 6 kind of recovery. Season 7 continues a decline, and then season 8 is the cult, like where you're getting now 45% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. So like, when did they stop giving a fuck? If you're the ones, and I'm kind of like this, like, you know, seasons 1 through 6, you might have your quibbles, but it's still a really damn fine show. I think they found out the bullet points way before then. So everybody's trying to psychoanalyze these guys, and I don't know, like, because I do think these guys, somebody's going to talk about this in our lifetime, and it'll be fascinating to see that.
Yeah.
Like, probably, honestly, if George finishes these books, I think there'll be people coming out and talking about it, because there's no way the Double D's never talk about this thing that put them on the map again.
Yeah, I would be super fascinated to hear some insights from people close to the production. I think the one thing that I am prepared to state is that they do seem checked out. Mm-hmm. At some point. I don't know when it happened. I don't know why it happened. If it's because they didn't like the bullet points they got and they said we're never going to be able to fucking do this, and it discouraged them. I don't know. But it seemed clear to me at some point that the writing just took a major downturn and never recovered.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, it'd be interesting to figure out exactly why that happened, because I spend some time thinking about this, how can you not? And I just come back to, like, when did they turn against Game of Thrones? Was it just like the grind? Like, it's not even they lost their love for the material. It's just that, like, Jesus Christ, we've been doing nothing but Game of Thrones for 6 years. We're sick of it. Oh, you want us to do 4 more seasons? Fuck you. You want us to do 3 more episodes? Fuck you. And that sucks to hear as a fan, but it's entirely understandable from a human perspective. And, like, it's almost like they're doing this job, and the guy that gave them the assignment has just fucked off for years and years. And it's like, well, if he's not going to do it, then why? Like, I think it's inexcusable. It's unprofessional, and it's terrible behavior to treat your fans like that. But, like, I kind of get it. Mm-hmm. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying I understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Jenna W., this is our last feedback for this episode. Since Season 8 did nothing for me, and I'm longing for the Game of Thrones goodness that once was, I've decided to reread the books. I know you guys were talking about maybe catching Jim up so that he would be able to take part in the Winds of Winter podcast whenever that would be, but have you guys thought of doing a Song of Ice and Fire book club podcast like you did with Fire and Blood? I'd love to relive the series with some amazing like-minded individuals such as yourselves, and I'm sure since the show was so unsatisfying, many others are yearning for this same kind of experience. I want to walk back, because I don't think you've ever committed to or even said that you would be interested in reading A Song of Ice and Fire.
No, I think that ship has sailed for me. It's weird because I am reading like the Expanse books, and they are of similar length, I'd say, to some of the Martin books. But it's material that I'm inherently more interested in. It's sci-fi instead of fantasy. And I just, like, at this point, I'm never going to get as much out of the books as people who've been reading and rereading and rereading these books for the last 20 years have gotten out of them. I don't know that I can do justice to a book club kind of thing. I think there are a lot of other people out there doing that much better than I ever could. So I just don't see, like, what I know, like, experiencing this with your friends Jim and Aaron would be a very cool thing for a lot of people. I get it, but we do so much other stuff here that it's like, are we really going to go into this book thing? Is that what people want from us? We have a largely TV based audience. It's there are just so many factors in here that I look at and go, I don't know.
And I think just from a business perspective, I don't think there would be a lot of interest in that, because there are so many book club type experiences. And again, not with us, but then, we've got we got our slice of the audience here. I'm definitely going to talk about Fire and Blood when it comes out. If they ever release Winds, I will do some kind of book club. But, like, going back and doing all the books, that would be a lot of fun for me, but I don't know that it would have an audience that would justify it. So, like, going forward is one thing, especially since, like I said, do not unsubscribe to this feed unless you're just over Game of Thrones and you don't want to give the prequels a chance, because we're going to be converting this into a prequels feed as soon as we're done wrapping up Game of Thrones.
But the thing is, we got so much other shit to cover, right? Like, we're
Right.
going to be talking about Watchmen and Stranger Things and His Dark Materials. And,
Yeah.
like, we're going to get deep into the lore of these shows. And, frankly, holding this much fucking information in my head
It's very hard.
is a huge drain on me.
Yeah.
Like, and then to go in and start adding, like, real deep book stuff. Like, I'm not the kind of person who can just read something, watch something, and remember it with picture perfect clarity and have instant recall and that stuff. I have to like stay in a thing in order to really sort of have it at hand. And that's what you need for a podcast. So I would have to be, still immersed in Game of Thrones for the next year before the prequels come out. And man, I've got like 5 other shows that I got to immerse in. So
yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, the fact that they're books is a huge problem for me. I don't actually read a lot. I listen to several audiobooks a year, but like actually staring at words on a page, I don't do very much. And I don't think our audience is the type that reads, that comes to us for written material.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, like I said, the new stuff going forward, I'm going to do it because I'm interested, and I do think that when it's fresh, like we did quite well in the Fire and Blood preview podcast, as a percentage of our audience that we held on to versus their television coverage. So
yeah, well, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe
well,
I'm
no,
totally
I
wrong.
think
And the audience
I want to
would.
make a distinction between going back and doing the older books and covering the new stuff that everyone's interested in, and they're all, like if I said, let's say we got 1 million people listening to the podcast, I'm like, okay, let's all do a rewatch. I like what is 5% of the people going to be down for it right now, especially the way the other thing is also the way Game of Thrones ended is like whatever audience size would have been up for that is like at least cut in half, because some people like myself are kind of like, I need to take a break from this. Like, I will admit to this being like the fact that I did write these 2 books in the off season, and we also went back and rewatched 2 full seasons of the show to complete our coverage, and we did the Fire and Blood, like I did the Fire and Blood stuff. Like, I came in so fucking prepared to do Game of Thrones like I've never been before. Like, I was fucking on it, and I feel like some of that has fed into my disappointment. Like, if I had covered this more like a regular show, I still think I'd have been disappointed because there's some bullshit here. But how disappointed would I have been if I had not invested so much of my life as a fan and as a person producing this content that, like, yeah, I'm kind of ready to sign off from Game of Thrones and check out some other things and come back. Like, Fire and Blood comes out, come back. New prequel news to talk about, come back. Winds of Winter, absolutely come back. But going and just arbitrarily reading the book to try, like I said, I know people would watch it, and I know I'd get feedback. It's just...
Yeah, so we've done coverage of shows that are no longer on the air, and they consistently have dismal numbers compared to our fresh coverage of airing shows. So now to translate that to not only, old material, but also a entirely different medium, I just don't think it would serve many people. You may be one of them, emailer whose name I
there
cannot
would
remember
be
after this
lots of people that would be down for
discussion.
it.
Yes, there would be some people who would be down for it, but it would not be the bulk of our audience. And honestly, like, our concentration being on things that are fresh and exciting in that type of way, like The Watchmen, His Dark Material, stuff like that, is much
The
more.
Expanse.
Yeah, it's much more relevant for us. Yeah, I mean, if you want to pick up another Game of Thrones like The Expanse.
We're also not hosting book clubs of the first 3 books in Expanse either. So
No, I am reading those though. I'm kind of
fucking
the
jealous of you,
lore
actually,
guy on that one.
because I read the first 3 and like, God, I want to read. I just like, you just want to keep going, man.
Yeah.
It's just like a game. Like, there's no point in the unfinished story where it's like, yep, okay, I'm ready to check out. So
No, not yet. Anyway.
I'm jealous. Okay, that's all we've got for this podcast. Thanks for everybody who made it to the end. We have not completed our Game of Thrones coverage after, even though we said the last 5 minutes we kind of are, because we have a wrap-up podcast, and this is going to be maybe it'll be a bittersweet wrap-up, because I would like to talk about. I've been working on an outline that has, like, some of my favorite moments. Game of Thrones, but there's also going to be some bitter points, like, discussion about like how this season is going to impact its place in history, and just kind of how we all feel, because I don't think we've talked about that yet. Like, how do we feel about the series a week out? Like, how do we feel about it? How do we feel about our investment and our time and how it's been spent, and You know, is this going to be like one of those shows where everybody's like, well, I was kind of bummed about how it finished, but the ride was worth it? I mean, I'm definitely in that camp. There's going to be people that are just like, you know what, fuck the show, I'm never going to watch it again kind of camp. Like, I'm curious, and I'm also curious to see how this show continues to evolve. And if you're curious too, then maybe you can tune in next week for our wrap up of the series itself. And there might be one podcast, there might be two, depending on how much feedback we get and how much interest there is. But we're definitely going to do the wrap up podcast next week. The first one will be out on Tuesday. So come back for that. Send in feedback to GameOfThrones@baldmove.com. Again, there's always the forums at baldmove or forums.baldmove.com. If you want to keep up on our off-season coverage, and if Fire and Blood Volume 2 comes out, or if Winds of Winter comes out, please stay subscribed to this feed because it's not going anywhere. We're just transforming it to serve those prequel and other Martin work purposes. What else am I forgetting? Follow us on social media @/baldmove if you want to keep up on what we're doing. Like we said, we got lots of great content this year. With The Expanse, with Stranger Things, with The Watchmen, and with his Dark Materials, a bunch of stuff I'm probably forgetting, because baldmove.com rolls on year long. Thank you for being with us this far. Really appreciate all the love and support we've gotten this season, not to mention all the others. We'll be back next week, and until then, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Jim.
See ya.